Hey, what's up, y'all? Classic Kev back with another episode. Y'all, we got a really wild episode because I got my boy Svetski decided to come on. We're going to talk, and he's the author of the UnCommunist Manifesto. I'm sure you guys has heard of Karl Marx, one of my favorite books, the Communist Manifesto. But Svetski's coming on to talk a little FTX, talk a little crypto. But Svetski, how you doing, man?
I'm good, brother. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no worries, brother. So, talk to me. The UnCommunist Manifesto. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. What is it about?
Well, the basic premise is a fuck you to the. Well, I shouldn't say it's just that. It's not just the rebuttal to the original Communist Manifesto, which is obviously a book that has led to God knows what sort of ideologies around the world, and hundreds of millions of dead, etc., etc. So, we wrote something that was basically from, for lack of a better term, libertarian first principles. The idea of the book was to, encourage people to adopt responsibility and freedom as sort of core tenets uh, of a society worth living in. And yeah, we kind of emulated the length and the scope of the book, and we just we gave a different message.
Yeah. So, why do you think it is? Why is Karl Marx's work? Why is it so popular? Because it seems like it's not so much of a book as it is a plan or a guide, if you will. Why is this literature so popular in our culture?
I think we tried to answer that in chapter 4 of our book, and the only thing we could come up with, I mean, there's many reasons, but the best sort of explanation that we came up with was this idea that it's easier to destroy than it is to build. It's easier to bring someone down than it is to raise them up, right? So entropy, it's like the force in the universe that sits counter to life, right? Life is a force that sort of builds and creates out of nothing, and that requires energy, whereas entropy is the dissipation of energy. It's the opposite way around. And as I said, it's easier to destroy than it is to build. It's easier to bring someone down than it is to raise them up. Like those sort of truths are axiomatic. And what communism really does is it kind of creates an academic justification for entropy, really. Like it's an academic justification for being a lazy fuck, being an entitled little shit, for someone else doing the work. Like, I mean, the classic communist credo, right, is from each uh, from each of their ability to each, sorry, from each according to their ability to each according to their need, right? Which means if you're more capable than me, in a communist environment, I should have the same amount that you do, because I need it. And who justifies and who validates the need? Well, uh, whoever the fuck the authority is that decides to mandate what the need or which need is valid. So it's fucking ridiculous. But as I said, I think it just there's always the 80-20 rule exists in all layers of society. It exists in everything. Like the 80-20 is a fractal all throughout the universe. And if we look at the productive versus non-productive class of people, I guess the 80-20 rule applies there as well. 20% are productive, 80% are not so productive. So communism appeals to the large amount of unproductive lazy fucks that there is out there, that will basically vote in a set of bureaucrats that will redistribute wealth from the productive people to the others, because they don't have to do anything about it, because it sounds nice and it's all fluffy and cute on the surface.
Yeah, and so a big theme of Karl Marx, I believe it's the core theme of communism, is to seize the means of production. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess, what is the meaning of that? Like, could you explain what is the meaning to seize the means of production? Because what it seems to me is that through the implementation of socialism, which will then lead to communism, because the socialists, basically that will collapse the system. When a system collapses, then the populace will beg for the communism. So that's why it appeals to people. But could you explain the whole concept of what the seize the means of production actually means?
Well, it was that's to understand that, you sort of need to view it through the context of the time at which, or the period or the era in which Marx actually wrote that uh, leaflet, pamphlet, whatever the hell it was in the first place, because it wasn't actually a book. I think it was just a pamphlet that was handed out, the Communist Manifesto originally. It just got later published as a book. So, the context of that era was a world transitioning out of what was ostensibly, feudalism, into the industrial age, and there was a huge upheaval of the status, the structure of the society, how status worked, who were the rich, who were the poor, all these sorts of things. So that, like, the whole society kind of got turned on its head. And in that period, what happened was that the merchant class, who were already growing quite wealthy in the centuries preceding, particularly through the sort of the Renaissance age and all of that sort of stuff, you sort of had the rise of the merchants. As far back really as kind of 1300s Venice, and obviously the Medici family and everything that happened in Florence, and all that sort of stuff, right? So you had this sort of growth of the merchant, but really it was post the French Revolution in the late 1700s, and the sort of the bleeding into the 1800s with the rise of the Prussians, and the kind of the establishment of a modern so-called state outside of the monarchy. You had this massive centralization of the means of production, and in that shift, you had this like huge wealth creation for those industrialists who managed to capture those means of production, for better or worse. I'm sure there was some industrialists that were real hardcore awesome entrepreneurs who really changed the face of the planet, but then there were also probably the kind of more unscrupulous versions that we know of, like whether it's the Rothschilds or whoever we want to sort of name, the Rockefellers, etc., who maybe use that opportunity to I mean, I don't know, I'm sort of in two minds here, because like Rockefeller is one example of someone that a lot of people don't like, but without his ingenuity, oil wouldn't have taken hold in the world like it did, right? So anyway, so there's a lot of sort of pros and cons here. But anyway, the communist sort of idea was, there's these corporate structures essentially that have taken hold of these so-called means of production, and in order for us to fix the world and to equalize it, we must seize it back. And there's many problems with that. Number one is seizing the property of another is fundamentally immoral. Like that's first, wrong at the outset. And this is why communism has always turned into so much bloodshed, right? Because the core premise is that, you've got one idiot who thinks that property is a figment of our imagination, and the other person is like, well, this is my fucking property. So, the communist thinks that, well, I'll just seize it. And that is like
For the greater good.
wrong.
For the greater good.
Yeah, exactly. For the greater good, right? And so not only is it wrong, but it will always, maybe not always, but it'll generally tend to violence, right? Because the person who holds the property in the first place just doesn't want to give it up. But then, what the communists also didn't realize, so, after all the violence and the bloodshed and the seizing of the property, then the property went to, the means of production went to these sort of committees, and these committees all failed because, like, running anything through a bureaucratic committee is the fucking, like, there's no better way to slow down efficiency, to destroy efficacy, like to basically lose quality. Like all of that shit sort of happens, and we see it in places like, go to the DMV, right? Like to get your license sorted out. You want to fucking kill yourself and everyone else in there because of how useless the process is. And this is sort of what ended up killing communism in the end. Well, I shouldn't say in the end, because here we are fighting communism in a, in a sort of cultural format. But anyway, so to come back to your first question, what did it mean to seize the means of production? There was a lot of changes, and the communist ideal was to take it by force if it wasn't voluntarily given up, and then allow the workers to somehow figure out what to do, which created a power vacuum, an authority vacuum, and the authority and power vacuum was just filled by bureaucrats. And then you just had this sort of ass backwards society sort of built out the back of it. So it's a dumbest idea ever.
Yeah. So do you think if Karl Marx was here today, is there a particular country or government type government now that he would look at and say that is the closest to my ideology? And do you think that America is going the way of his system, of the communist system?
Yeah, I wonder, like
what government would he look at right now and say that's the closest? That's the closest. Would it be China? Would it be North Korea? Would it be?
It's tough. I mean, I think he would probably align most with what sort of the World Economic Forum is trying to do more than anybody else. Like in his original Communist Manifesto, like he's very critical of the idea of the nation state. And believes that should be abolished, and that the only grouping that matters is the grouping of the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, which is to translate, that means the workers versus the holders of capital and property, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the rich versus the poor, whichever kind of definition we want to give to two groups. But I would probably say the World Economic Forum and what they're aspiring to create. So maybe even the EU might be more like the closest description of it, right? Now, is America going that way? I would say absolutely, because it's funny. It's actually a fantastic question you asked, because a lot of people don't realize this, but they sort of say, they hold America up as the paragon of capitalism, which in the early days it absolutely was, and much of the prosperity that America experiences today is actually a function of that early kind of renegade frontiersman type of attitude, and laissez-faire, lack of minimal government and all that sort of stuff. Like so the fact that existed, America's still riding on those coattails, right? Everything, a lot of the prosperity is still downstream from that. Now, the like in I think it's chapter 2 or chapter 3 of the Communist Manifesto, like I believe it's right at the end of chapter 2, there's like a 10 commandments of communism, and I suggest everybody go, you can get the book for free online, just download it, and you'll see what the 10 commandments are. It's things like I think point number 5 is a national central bank that issues all the money. There's I think point number 2 is a heavy progressive taxing code, basically. So the more you earn, the more you get taxed. The nationalization and the operation of all education and schooling by the state, the nationalization of all means of communication and transport by the state. There's a whole list
Progressive,
of 10,
gradual income tax, abolition of
abolition of
private
private
property,
property.
abolish
Yep.
rights of inheritance. So if you think about inheritance
Yes.
taxes, that's what that is.
Yep.
Redistribute the population, and free and public education.
So all of
Very
these things.
interesting.
So
I guess that's a
exactly.
coincidence.
I know. So if you sit down and look at like what's happening in the US, and basically all the countries that are sort of quote unquote the West and get viewed as kind of capitalist, they basically tick 5 or 6 or 7 of those fucking boxes.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and we wonder why things are, so backwards and fucked up at the moment. It's because we're like practically living Marx's dream.
Oh, yeah. 100%. So, you brought up, it was really good answer you gave me on, saying the World Economic Forum. So what I think about the World Economic Forum is, they preach an ideology of stakeholder capitalism. What is the best definition of what stakeholder capitalism actually is, and does it apply to any of this?
Man, that word, I don't even like. The thing is, this is the classic, like, what bureaucrats do and what these sort of, uh, parasitic elites sort of do is they throw around words that like a devoid of meaning. Like, I don't even know what stakeholder capitalism is. Like, I mean, capitalism just means that, you like you take things and stuff, and you produce value out of them, and value being, a marginal subjective sort of concept, means that, as you take these things and stuff, you have risk on the other end, with respect to whether you created value or not, right? So you either wasted energy, time, and resources, or you didn't, and then you correct your behavior, or you double down on it depending on what the outcome was, and you do it again. So like capitalism is like a natural process. We've been doing that shit since we first figured out how to start a fire and like build a trap to catch an animal, or like that is literally capitalism. It's just progress. It's like using capital more efficiently and more effectively. And capital is just time, energy, and fucking natural resources. Like what more noble thing for a human to do than use those things better, right? So that's sort of capitalism. Now the question is then, what is, who the fuck is the stakeholder in this process of capitalism? Well, the
All the
person
biggest
who's using.
corporations.
Well, no. So let me just sort of say, this is why the term is so vague and so like pernicious. Is that in capitalism, like capitalism is always about the stakeholder, in the sense that the stakeholder is the person who is either benefiting on the other end of the natural process of capitalism. So if I'm like a person running a cafe and I take like food from the farmer, I put it together, I mix it with my time and my labor, and I produce a nice fucking sandwich that someone wants to buy because they value it. Um, I, as the business owner, am the stakeholder. Like, there's nothing wrong in essence with this idea of stakeholder capitalism. The problem is with the WEF is that they sort of push this narrative of stakeholder capitalism, which kind of seems, on the surface, you think about it like stakeholder capitalism. Well, yeah, okay, that's great. But then they push the other narrative of like, you'll own nothing and be happy. Now, the thing is, the stakeholder is the owner. So if you own nothing and be happy, then who is the person who's going to own something? So under their model, they own everything, and they are the stakeholders, which capitalism benefits. And the rest of us are just, a bunch of serfs who have our wealth extracted from us. So it's just, it really is like one of those things that they sort of they say it. It doesn't really mean anything, because like capitalism has always been about the stakeholder. The thing is, these fucking morons are trying to now dictate and decide who is allowed to be a stakeholder and who is not. And that is where things, the sort of the wheels fall off.
Yeah, you're right. So it's very interesting. So what I would want to think is that where does crypto, where does Bitcoin especially fall into all of this? Because, if we study the World Economic Forum, our overlords at the World Economic Forum, they openly talk about crypto. They openly talk about digital blockchain identifications, implementation into society. They openly talk about all of this, but specifically Bitcoin. What do you think it falls into this transition we're going, this in a fourth industrial revolution, as Klaus Schwab calls it?
Bitcoin is the biggest fucking thorn in their side, basically. Like there is nothing more annoying for them than Bitcoin, which is why they're going to attack it with the climate stuff. They're going to attack it as, like a extremist, right wing, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the fuck they can throw at it, they will throw at it, in order to discredit it in the eyes of the public, right? Crypto for them is quite convenient. Like, it didn't come from them. They didn't invent it. They didn't create it. Like classic bureaucrats and parasites, something is created, then it gets, sort of deformed along the way. And then for them, crypto is kind of like really convenient. They're like, okay, look, now we have something that on the surface through a bunch of marketing and investment money and everything, has looks and sounds like Bitcoin. So Ethereum is the classic poster child, right? Is like Ethereum has marketed itself as like, the silver to Bitcoin's gold, or the world computer, which is like Bitcoin, but does these other things, which all these other things are fucking A, useless, and B, if they ever worked, it'd be like the you know the exact dream of like Big Brother, right? Like if anything that
Digital
Ethereum
dictatorship.
said, exactly, basically. So if anything, if Ethereum ever worked, like that's exactly what it would be representing. So anyway, you've got the World Economic Forum, etc. What they sort of realized was that, hey, we've got this thing that looks and sounds like Bitcoin, so let's go and back it. Let's, like proof of stake is a classic thing. What's the whole proof of stake kind of siren call? It's that, oh, we are more efficient than Bitcoin. Environment, right? So the WEF will do exactly this. And I said this fucking 3 years ago on a podcast with Pomp, was I said, watch, Ethereum will get captured by the state, whether it's World Economic Forum or whoever, and all they have to do there is, tap on Vitalik's shoulder and say, look, this is what we want, this is what we're going to do. And because these cryptos are all effectively, they're effectively like foundations or associations or companies, like of people. They just need to tap on the shoulders of those people, and they change the rules and do whatever the fuck they want. And that's like the one thing they can't fucking do with Bitcoin. There's no CEO, there's no group, there's no fucking person, there's no association, there's no foundation, there's no company, there's nothing, there's no shoulder to tap on to say, hey, Bitcoin dude, change this. So they're fucked. So like Bitcoin's this thing that has kind of emerged, and it's like unstoppable. So their only
Unless they buy it
weapon
all.
in, well, the problem is they can't, because in the process of trying to buy it, what will happen is like I think at this point, probably 20% of the Bitcoin, maybe 25% of the Bitcoin is like inaccessible, like people losing their private keys, etc. The next probably 30, 40, maybe even up to 50% is held in public keys, public private key pairs by psychopaths like me, who, I've set it up so that I can't even access my own Bitcoin for the next 20 years. So like no one's touching it.
Wow.
And then you have the balance of it. Maybe 10% is still on exchanges, and then the other 10% is still to be issued over the next 120 years. So if they tried to buy up that other 10%, like they would drive the price to 1 million, to 10 million, to 100 million very, very, very quickly, because it'll asymptotically affect the price. There's no supply there available. Like, unlike any other element or any other object or any other good in the world, Bitcoin is inelastic. So for example, like with gold, if people started, like if the whole world started buying gold tomorrow, it'd drive the price up. And what that'll do, it'll incentivize more miners to go dig more gold and get the gold that is harder to get. And they will bring more supply onto the market to stabilize the demand. So there's a natural balancing mechanism, because all commodities, all goods, all services are elastic in nature. Bitcoin's the only thing that's inelastic. So they would fuck themselves over if they try to buy it up. And that's where, that's sort of like, again, one of the things why they keep, their strategy won't be to try and buy it all. Like they'll probably buy some in the background, because they'll need to hedge. They'll need to sort of, just in case Ethereum or whatever fucking fails, they don't want to end up broke or bankrupt or have no money. So they'll buy some, but they will continually do things to try and discredit and suppress the price, because the price is merely just a reflection of the global understanding of what Bitcoin is valued at. So that's how they attack it. They attack it by trying to legitimize something like Ethereum or Cardano, or whatever other, insert the shitcoin. They'll try and legitimize that and delegitimize Bitcoin. And they will convince basically what I call the lemmings, like all the idiots. They'll convince them, but they won't convince those of us who want to, who first of all value freedom and responsibility and want to be sovereign, and not under their thumb. So I think the world's going to bifurcate. So anyway, I'll sort of shut up there for a moment, because I think,
No, you're doing great. You're
yeah,
doing great. Because that's actually leading off into what I was thinking about next. Is so FTX. I'm sure everybody watching this, if you made this far in the video, you probably know, almost tired of hearing about FTX. But a question that I haven't exactly had answered fully is the collapse of FTX. We know about the FTX partnership with the WEF. We know about the political donations. We know about all the fraud, all the corruption. But was the fall and collapse of FTX, do you think this was planned? Do you think that this was, not good for the elite? Do you like what is your take on that?
No, I think, I mean, the fact that they were, fucking around with just paper Bitcoin and it was all air, I think the understanding was that at some point this thing's going to blow up. So let's try and siphon as much money as we can. And the thing, I don't think they were counting on it blowing up so quickly. But that's the nature of screwing around with something like Bitcoin, is that there actually isn't, they can't print more Bitcoin. They can't create more, like, so they're sort of, they've always got this thing that's like a thorn in the side of all of their operations, right? So like, if Bitcoin didn't exist, they could print as much money they want. They could create whatever crypto they could continue the Ponzi that they've got. But Bitcoin's sort of this like release valve where people are actually taking real wealth and swapping it over for Bitcoin, and they are on an incompatible monetary network that can't be inflated, that can't be fucked with. So it's like this release valve for smart people, a release valve for responsible people, a release valve for people who kind of understand how fucked up the world is and where it's going. And they sort of, they're trying to do everything they can to kind of obfuscate that and make it unclear for people in general, which is, as I said, why they'll promote things like FTS, etc. But every now and again, when the leverage sort of stacks up, and when you have other exogenous blowups like 3AC and Luna and all these other sort of things that blew up around, they all blew up because you can only build a house of cards for so long until something cracks, and then you get this sort of cascade effect on the way down. And that's literally what happened to FTX. I just think like it's the classic what do you call it? The Cobra effect of you try and fix a problem here, and then you try to fix a problem in part A, and in fixing that through an interventionist sort of strategy, you create a problem in part D, E, F, G, X, Y, Z, and you don't even realize, and then something else cracks, and then all of a sudden you get this sort of cascade effect. And these cascade effects happen way more in monetary like Ponzi's, because effectively fear and greed are most loud there. So when someone actually, like, doesn't matter what side of the conspiracy theory fence they're on, when someone's about to lose money, politics go out the fucking window, and what is replaced with is, where the fuck's my money? so then things really, 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 really fucking quickly break down. So I think that's sort of what happened here, is that they would have had to be stupid to think that it was going to last. So I assume they thought that at some point it'll blow up, and then we'll be able to use it as a crisis, as they do with every other crisis. My guess, though, is I don't think they expected it to blow up so quickly.
Never let a good crisis go to waste. So what a lot of people are saying, I believe, is that the collapse of this, I think you're right. I think it was going to collapse. They knew it would collapse. I don't think they knew it would collapse this soon, or they wanted it to collapse this soon, because if they wanted to collapse this soon, I think the World Economic Forum would have had those partnerships deleted earlier. You see what I'm saying? So it's just little stuff like that makes me wonder. But what people are saying is that the collapse of this is what's going to usher in the central bank digital currencies, which, I don't know, like a year or two ago, that was a conspiracy theory to bring up a central bank digital. Now the banks are bragging, the governments are bragging that they're coming in. What world are we going to be able to live in where we're going to have Bitcoin and the CBDCs? Because a lot of my friends, a lot of people I know that's in this, they're like, no, we're not going to be able to have crypto assets. It's only going to be the CBDC.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I mentioned earlier, where I said I think the world is going to bifurcate. So, my guess, once again, is sort of to your point, is that, out the back of something like this, my guess is that the plan would have always been, yes, when this does blow up, we'll be able to talk about CBDCs and legitimize that as a concept and as an idea. They're by no means ready for any of that shit, honestly. Like the amount of engineering that requires, to do that at scale is a lot, number one. And number two, these guys are bureaucrats. They're fucking stupid. They can't execute They bumble everything that they sort of touch. So, my guess is that their best strategy is probably going to be to partner with someone like Ethereum or something like that. That'll be a quicker way to launch a CBDC.
That's that's alarming because that's kind of been something that I've kind of predicted on this channel that the CBDC, at least the United States one, will be built on Ethereum, which makes me feel like very strange about investing in it. You know what I'm saying? It's just
Totally,
like
yeah.
this, like a
That's what I
guilt.
tell everyone. Yeah. I mean, look, Vitalik is, if I had to guess, he's a fucking plant of the WEF, and that the whole Ethereum thing is basically their best chance to get people who are skeptical or becoming increasingly skeptical of government to adopt a CBDC under the radar. Right. That is for me. If I was on their side, if I was sitting in a WEF chair and I was thinking about how best to make sure that we um, get maximum adoption for this, is I would do a deal with Ethereum 100%. 100%. You get the tech thing, you get the Wonder Boy, with Vitalik, you get the fact that it's already out there. You get all the people who are kind of, on the fence, like, because there's a lot of Ethereum people who are kind of anti-authority, but so you actually acquire all of them in one shot. And you don't have to build your own shit. Like, so all of that sort of stuff adds up. The biggest challenge they'll have is that Ethereum is just fundamentally broken. So I don't know how well, I don't think it'll be able to scale well enough in order to do that. So maybe they'll have to do it like via some side chain or something like that. I'm not sure what the technical aspect is going to be, but yeah, to sort of tie it back, is like the fall of FTX is going to help justify the introduction of a CBDC. Now, this is where, once again, Bitcoin shines above all other basically freedom-oriented types of money and payment networks, is that if we wanted to go back to, like, for example, what Peter Schiff and everyone talks about, like a gold standard, who in the flying fuck is going to build an entire global network on a gold standard where you're gonna have to trust, vaults and new software, new forms of wallet, and all this? Like, the government will shut your ass down straight away, like straight a fucking way. You go
Well,
to
didn't they
jail,
do
you're
that
dead.
before? Didn't the
Yeah,
government
well,
do
they
that before they
tried.
banned
That's it.
gold trading?
That's it. They tried. Now, good luck. Good luck. Like, Bitcoin is effectively a fucking program that runs on my laptop and runs on another tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of other laptops, and we just happen to be in sync. It's just bits and bytes running over fucking the internet. You can't tell what those bits and bytes are. They could be You could be watching porn, you could be on Twitter, you could be some Google searching, or you could be running a node. The internet doesn't fucking know. And therefore, the most the most anti-fragile way to set up, operate, and continually operate a parallel monetary network is by running something that looks, feels, and smells and operates like Bitcoin does. And that's what makes Bitcoin special, is that when I run a copy of the Bitcoin network on my computer, I am fucking Bitcoin. Me. So long as I'm running a copy on my computer, the Bitcoin network lives. And so long as anybody else is running it, then we have a network. And the fact that we're always in sync means that we have this sort of global payments network, global monetary network that's incapable of being sort of closed down, so long as we sort of remain in sync. So I think what will happen is that you will get this sort of bifurcation in civilization. You'll have what I would call like the slave class, which is the ones using CBDCs, whether issued by Ethereum or WEF or central banks or whatever, whoever the fuck is gonna, whatever partnership that looks like is gonna happen. So you'll have those people. Then you'll have people who are on a Bitcoin standard, and they'll have their wallets. They'll be kind of off the radar. It'll be kind of like it'll become the cash economy, right? So in every country, you have the normal payments digital economy, and you also have the cash economy. And like, the cash economy is always going to exist. It's just going to have to become better than the piece of paper that is issued by the government, because the government at some point is going to stop issuing that. So everyone that was operating on a cash economy before is going to end up on Bitcoin. And that's going to be the real economy. That'll be sort of like the quote unquote black market economy. And the thing is, we're just going to have to endure until CBDCs really start to crack up and collapse. And just like in every other country where, they've had broken money, whether it's Argentina, whether it's whoever, the black cash economy has always existed and actually operated under the radar, right? And at some point, the officials who are supposed to enforce the non-use of those, black economies and everything, they sort of turn a blind eye because motherfucker's got to eat, and he gets sort of paid off, and like so all these sort of things are going to occur, and we'll kind of have these two worlds, I think. And someone might say, well, you're not going to be able to swap between CBDCs and Bitcoin. That's going to be true in terms of like you won't be able to do that on a Coinbase, or a Kraken, or a major exchange, but you'll be able to do it with your friend down the road who, let's say, he's working a normal job and he's earning CBDCs. He'll probably have a spare phone, or a ledger or a Trezor or something like that. And if you are on a Bitcoin standard, and you might want to go, normally, let's say you pay your butcher in Bitcoin because you've already created that network around you. You might want to go to a normal shop which doesn't accept Bitcoin, like a Whole Foods or whatever, and you need some CBDCs. Well, you just trade with the guy down the street, swap some Bitcoin, because he's going to be incentivized to want some Bitcoin, because that's Bitcoin is the thing that doesn't lose value because it's fixed in supply, blah, blah, blah. So he'll want to do that. He'll give you some CBDCs, and then you go and buy your fucking shit at Whole Foods. So these black market economies, these networks will emerge, as they try and suppress. And then it's going to be a game of how do we outlast their shitstorm, which I think their kind of system is going to fall apart because of how broken the underlying economy that their CBDCs represent is. And it'll implode the same way as, the USSR imploded. And where is all the wealth going to go? That's when we'll see a real bull run in Bitcoin, because then the only escape valve for everybody is going to be Bitcoin. And that's probably when we see Bitcoin go from, say, $1 million to $100 million a coin, or $1 billion a coin. Something crazy like that will happen.
Incredible. I mean, it's, I see it happening because, what I look at is the Dutch farmers, with everything going on there with the WEF, and they're selling, going straight from their farm, selling, cheese and milk and stuff from their farm, and then transacting straight through Bitcoin, and what I tell people, if the government could stop it, if they could ban it, it would have been banned. There's no way they would have let it get this big,
Yeah, it's too late. Like the time to sort of kill Bitcoin was sort of in the first 5 years of its existence. And the funny thing about it, though, is, and this is the classic attitude of the bureaucrats, they see something new, then they laugh at it, they ridicule it, they ignore it. It's the classic Mahatma Gandhi saying, right? First they laugh at you, then first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then they join you, right?
Then
so
you
it's
win.
like,
Yeah, once they fight
yeah,
you,
then you win, or whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. So that's that's sort of like the time to kill Bitcoin sort of passed. It's too late now. And as I said, like they've got to change strategy, and their strategy is going to be to try and like accelerate the adoption of, or the introduction and adoption of CBDCs. They're going to try and discredit. They're going to do all this sort of stuff. But yeah, like I said, I think we're going to have a two track world, and then the thing is going to be like how long does that two track world sort of operate, and how bad is the the CBDC world. If that gets bad very quickly, that means, everyone ends up on a Bitcoin standard sooner, but it also does mean more like suffering, versus it could be more mildly bad, where it's like a slow burn, sort of slow clown world, slow deterioration of civilization. And that might mean a slower sort of move onto an inevitable long-term sort of Bitcoin standard. But it might just mean that we have to endure it longer. So that's sort of the only question that I'm unsure of. But I'm pretty sure that, as I said, we're going to have a bifurcated world. We will have different types of people using different types of money. There'll be the black cash economy will effectively be the Bitcoin economy. You have the so-called legitimate white economy being CBDCs, and that they will interact, not officially, mostly unofficially, I believe. And then it'll be a case of what that
That's
transition looks like.
That's what's interesting because, you think about, like, say, like Walmart, Walmart accepting food stamps, and people do that already, where they give people cash for their food stamps, or they use the food stamps to buy it, and they sell the food stamps and vice versa, right? But, what I think about in this new society with CBDCs, would, these big Walmart type, that are there along with the CBDC agenda, will they accept Bitcoin too? I mean, I think it'd be hard pressed for them not to accept it, right?
Oops, sorry, I was on mute. Look, here's the thing. So maybe initially they won't, right? But at some point they will. So let's say you know, and this will all sort of come, this will all sort of be downstream of how authoritarian the regulators and the sort of like uh, authorities sort of want to be. And now, if they're a little bit more lax, and this is sort of the bind they're caught in, because if they get very quickly authoritarian, like they'll get huge sort of backlash, right? It's like, no, you can't use this to buy food. And it's like, motherfucker, I need to buy food, and people are going to riot, right? So you sort of have like they're sort of dancing on a line, so they may have to allow it as a form of payment, but in doing so, they sort of inadvertently legitimize it. So they're sort of in a rock and a hard place. So they might choose like the authoritarian path and say, no, fuck you, you can't. But they sort of risk the vitriol of the people they supposedly represent, which as much as we know they don't care about the people, they still have to manage public opinion anyway. So politics is sort of tricky in that sense. So, maybe what ends up happening is that they only let I don't know. There's sort of two ways that uh, they might not allow the big chains to do it, but allow small chains to do it. But in doing that, maybe that sort of backfires on them, because then the small chains get stronger, with sort of real economies, and the big chains get weaker. So then the big chains are like, no, fuck you, we want to accept Bitcoin. So it's very tricky. There's a lot of stakeholders. And this is why, I'm always hesitant to sort of believe in like big grand conspiracy theories, because there's always so many people sort of with fingers in the pie.
Yeah.
It's very hard to like herd everyone in a single direction. So it's they have a tough problem on their hands, basically. And the way we beat them is not through one single blow. It's like death by a thousand cuts. It's like you sort of kind of in everywhere, and it just becomes hard for them to do anything without tangling themselves up.
Yeah, you're right. Because when you think about it, we've seen reports of the United States government, the Russian government, the Chinese government own a ton of Bitcoin, like billions of dollars of these assets. Plus, when you really think about it, the amount of politicians and, Wall Street influential people that own it, that fund the campaigns of the regulators and the politicians, they're not going to want their piggy banks hit. You see what I'm saying? So it's definitely an interesting problem. But Svetski, I know we're running out of time, my man. Man, dude, this was an awesome interview, man. Can you tell my audience where they can find you and where they can find your book?
For sure, brother. Thank you. So if you go on Svetski.info, I think that'll sort of redirect you to like a little link tree type site that I've got where people can sort of find all the links. The main thing I'm doing these days is I'm writing. So I've got the UnCommunist Manifesto that I wrote with Mark Moss. We were on Alex Jones and everything, talking about it, all sorts of people, and it's a good short book that people can get and sort of see through a lot of the bullshit in the world, and kind of have a manifesto that they hopefully bring them some hope. The other thing I'm working on is called the Bitcoin Times. It's basically a collection of unique essays that a set of writers write for me each year, and it's a different group of writers each year on a particular topic. This year is the Austrian edition, where we look at Bitcoin through the lens of the School of Austrian Economics, and that's about to go live. And that's a really, really cool little publication. It's once a year, super high quality. That one's at bitcointimes.io. And then I'm on Twitter generally. So Svetski writes, WRITES. They can sort of follow me there, and yeah.
Well, hey guys, and I'll be sure to have all the links for Svetski in the bio of this video. So y'all make sure to give him a follow. Definitely check out his book. Svetski, thank you so much for the time, man. That was a really awesome interview. And y'all, I'm Classic Cav. This is Svetski. We're out, y'all. Peace.